Yeah, this history is quite old, even if our process is not that old. Already in the 70s, many civil society organizations were already denouncing the crimes committed by businesses in the frame of the dictatorships in Latin America. And already on that time, the industrialized countries were opposing to the adoption of obligations of states in order to ensure the protection and inclusion in the different legislations of obligations also for the transnational companies. The way out that these who were detracting the idea of binding instruments was to propose voluntary instruments where the companies commit to comply with some standards. Nonetheless, all these, like the Global Compact, the OECD guidelines, and others, seem not have been very effective, and that's why in 2013 civil society was very concerned due to different political developments as well. One of those was that all these voluntary mechanisms didn't have a transnational component, which means that all the abuses by companies and all the crimes which were committed by transnational companies which are present in different states were really not regulated, and normally just the smallest unities in the transnational were in some times held accountable, while those who were really profiting remain in the impunity. So the lack of extraterritorial obligations of the states was of our concern. Also, we saw how the narrative of corporate social responsibility, which doesn't have any legal component and any penalty or liability for the corporations, was very predominant, and we thought, okay, when we talk about rights, we talk about obligations and not just about ethics. And therefore we want a binding instrument. And of course the systematic of these crimes has increased. We see that not just on the topics that motivated us in 2013, like for example all the impact of mining industries and others, but also in very new phenomena, like for example the financialization of the natural resources, putting for example lands where people live in the stock markets and producing speculation and really pushing for land grabbing and others, or all the crimes committed, for example, in the digitalized world where we do not have borders, but the rules have borders. And we were also very concerned about the regulatory asymmetry, because while in commercial and trade law we have binding, strong, detailed instruments, in human rights law, the instruments to regulate the activities of transnational companies remain very vague and ineffective. And that brought to the fact that many companies were claiming against the states that were trying to defend the human rights of their people. So these states were like in a kind of situation where they wanted to comply with their existing obligations on human rights, but they were economically threatened by the companies. And we thought this asymmetry in regulation cannot continue in that way, because that contradicts the primacy of human rights, which was the main pillar of the UN Charter and of course of all the human rights instruments since the UN Declaration. And of course, one of the biggest problems that we observed in the system is that there was not human rights regulation for economic activities, nor for the collective rights. And we understand that in the 48, after the war, many people were afraid about collective rights due to the effect of the Nazi regime, the collective, against the individuals. But the fact is that companies are collectives. So how do we want people to defend their rights if they cannot defend collective against these powerful collectives? So this also motivated us to claim for collective mechanisms, remedy mechanisms, for example. So on the basis of these claims, already In 2013, the civil society began, after the adoption of the principles of businesses and human rights in the council, we began to say, these are a begin, but these are not the end. They have many problems that are to be covered and to be solved, and therefore we want the Human Rights Council to go into the next step, and it is going for a binding instrument. In 2013, in Medellin, parallel to the first meeting of the working group in charge to implement the business and human rights principles, had a declaration asking the Council to create the intergovernmental space for the negotiation of the binding treaty. And later on, this was in August, and in September in Bangkok, we issued a bigger statement which has been supported by more than 1,000 organizations. These 1,000 organizations were behind the initiative and are behind the initiative. And after it, Ecuador posed the process in the Human Rights Council. In fact, we wanted one resolution, including the business and human rights principles and the treaty process, but unfortunately, those who do not want we to advance towards binding rules and the powerful of multilateralism in the way that it was developed on the beginning of the new era after the Second World War, they impeded that, and we had to go for a different resolution and a different process. Now we have had already 3 sessions. The first 2 sessions were dedicated mainly to discuss, to define which should be the scope, which should be the nature and the form of this treaty, and many content inputs were given by civil society, showing a plurality of possibilities. And later on, Chena will tell us which is the position of the global campaign for people's sovereignty. On the same time, other states, some states were also giving content inputs, but unfortunately, mostly of the industrialized states were always putting some procedural hurdles, and that's what we still are facing. Nonetheless, Ecuador, the chair of the process, presented an elements paper to the last session, to which 101 states participated, and more than 300 representatives of civil society. So it was quite impressive for an intergovernmental group. And what we are hoping now is to have very soon the first zero draft that has to be presented by Ecuador after a series of consultations that they are leading now during the last 2 months, and to go to the 4th session where states shall begin negotiating in cases where we cannot wait anymore because the violations and the abuses are systematic. Just to finish, we got notice from our colleagues defending the rights in Ecuador, the Chevron case, which one was of those motivating this process, that when going for justice in Canada to make Chevron liable, instead of getting justice, they got a fine of $350,000 Canadian dollars. So imagine, you go for justice, you get injustice, and all of that is legal because the system is not enough. That's what we are talking about the life of people who in many cases do not understand how companies come to do that, and how all these famous authorities here in the UN are not able to stop this injustice. Thank you very much.